And this is a Monday morning, I think. Is that right, Pat? Have I got it right this time for once?
So
Monday morning?
you've got it right. Yes, it's Monday morning.
I had my wits, I was going to say my mitts assembled, but my wits assembled for our exploration of things happening. And boy, oh boy, were
Yeah.
they happening up at Stormont over the weekend. What did you
Yes.
think? Were you impressed? Did you follow every detail or did you just sort of look for the news summary?
No, Jude, I sat from about what 12:30, quarter to one on Saturday until about 4 o'clock, watching the whole
Well,
thing. I never moved from the couch.
yeah.
Jude, I don't. I, I was thinking on a couple of people. One of whom was Frank Kern. Frank Kern was the editor of the Derry Journal for a few years, and he spent all his life as editor of the Derry Journal. Frank also, by the way, he also wrote a book called Countdown to Disaster, which a lot of people think is sort of nearly like a seminal text on what led to the outbreak of troubles in Derry and then across
Mm.
the north. But anyway, Frank, well, I remember I wasn't editor of the Derry Journal very long, and Frank was in reflective mood one morning, and he sat down. And he says, "You know, someone, Paddy says, I was born here, I was raised here, but I've never felt free here." And I says, Frank, why did you say it? He says, because they control everything. And I says, what do you mean? He said, like, I knew what he meant, but he was meant the unions. When he was growing up, like the Derry City Corporation had 20 members, 12 of whom were unionists or Protestant, and 8 of whom were Catholic and
Yeah.
nationalists.
Yeah.
Now,
Remember.
this was in a city that was 66% Catholic. And he said, even on a Sunday, the kids' play parks were closed
Oh.
and the swings were actually locked and tied up. He said, stupid things. And the other thing as well, even you couldn't go for a drink because there was this old sort of Calvinistic Presbyterianism that they shut all the bars. So everybody in Derry almost uh, crossed over the border into Donegal and so on. And that was the background. And I was thinking of Frank on Saturday when that came, because Frank said, he said to me, I remember that day as well. He said, Pat, I won't love to see the day that there's a Catholic or nationals on the top seat at Stormont. But he says, you probably will. And I was thinking of Frank because I did love to see it. He didn't.
It was certainly a historic moment. Um, I
Yeah.
thought, I'll tell you my thinking. Let's represent the two sides, DUP and Sinn Féin. I thought Michelle O'Neill did a very good performance. I thought she looked right, she dressed appropriately. The
Yeah.
way she spoke in terms of emphasizing that she was going to be a first minister for everybody. She said that apologized. She was sorry for the loss of the life of every single person who died in the Troubles.
Yeah.
So, and she said working together, she really would hope that we would make a job of it. Emma Little Pengelly is, she's certainly not Sammy Wilson or Gregory Campbell. But while she did say Michelle has her beliefs and I have my beliefs and, we can work together and so on, she did do a couple of things. She said, she gave us this detailed picture of her remembering when she was 11 years old and she came out and there was an explosion and there was glass all
Uh-huh.
over the place and people were shouting and people were full of fear. Uh, and there was an emphasis on that and then saying, all right, I'm going to work with these people, but we're not going to allow history to be rewritten. We'll remember
Yeah.
our history, but we'll not allow it to dominate us, but we'll not let it be rewritten either. I just thought there was kind of grudge would be too hard a word, but it was a certain reluctance there. There was a lack of the same generosity of spirit that seems to me, now I'm biased, I suppose, but I thought there was more generosity of spirit coming from Michelle O'Neill than there was from Emma.
Yeah, well, I'm aware of what you're saying. This morning, again, Jeffrey Donaldson was the Tisha and Sunak are coming today. But anyway, Jeffrey Donaldson was on this morning, and he was asked about. I think Michelle O'Neill said she thinks there'll be a border pool in this decade, and he says, "Why is she talking about such divisive things?" She said she'd be the minister for all that. That's upsetting type things. I was thinking, you know, every time, like, right, let's go revert to the original. What you're saying, uh, what do you call her? Pengelly, little Pengelly. She mentioned about the bombings. Like, Michelle O'Neill could have turned around and said, I remember a time when there was a one unionist state. My parents grew up on it. There was bigotry, there was sectarianism, there was a paramilitary organization called the B Specials. Uh, the last person in Britain to be whipped with the cat of nine tails was a young nationalist, and so on. And we could all throw back and so on that. But no, no, she didn't. Jude, it seems to be that if nationalists mention anything, they're divisive. But unionist politicians are allowed to throw in all this. Well, I'm not saying, that's I'm expecting little Pengelly to ignore history. But we can both do it if we want to. If we want to go down that particular road.
Yeah, as I understand it, Emma's father, of course, you're not responsible for your parents, but her father was a loyalist paramilitary, isn't that right?
Yeah,
No, so
my
presumably,
understanding.
he could well have been involved in some explosions or shootings or whatever, and there would have been the same kind of fear, panic, etc., etc. Um, just a sort of a side note is my son, one of my sons, went to the States on a kind of I think they call it something really stupid, like Young Leaders of the Future or
Yeah,
something like that. Anyway, it was mixed Catholics and Protestants, obviously, and part of the group was Emma Little, what became Emma Little Pengelly. And now this is, you're going back 20 years, I'd say. And he said
yeah,
she was the best fun ever. She was full of
yeah.
life. She was great crack. You could be sure of having a good time if Emma was part of the company. Um,
Hmm.
I don't detect that in her spirit now. I mean, she has a fresh sort of voiced and fresh faced,
Hmm.
but you know, uh, it's a pity that would impress my son so much that I wouldn't get some sense of that when she stands up in Stormont.
Yeah, but just to move on a wee bit, Professor Deirdre Heenan was on Sunday Politics program yesterday morning, and
Yeah.
she was remarkably strong on that thing about the fact that Pengelly has been parachuted in to be first
Oh
deputy
yes.
first
Yes.
minister.
Yes.
Yeah, and she says, she's everybody's on sort of ignoring it, but she says it is seriously undermining the whole concept. She says there is a democratic deficit. She says this woman has never been elected, or I don't know, maybe she was elected once, but she hasn't been elected. She's been parachuted in on top of. Now, I'm sure a lot of the DUP people who were elected, like Paul Given and all, must be asking what's wrong with us that she's sort of come on here and she's been given the top job. But anyway, that's a side issue. But basically, she said, imagine this. I'm talking about Deirdre Heenan. It was a brilliant point actually when I thought about it. She said, imagine if Mary Lou McDonald had walked in here yesterday. This was chatting on Sunday about Saturday's events. She said, imagine Mary Lou McDonald had walked, or Michelle O'Neill, sorry, had walked in here with Jerry Adams and said, I'm making him Minister for Finance. She says there would have been absolute uproar.
Hmm.
And she
Hmm.
says, just because it's doable under the rules doesn't mean it's right. And she says, Emma Pengelly has not been elected by anyone.
Well, I take that point, and I think a number of people, whenever she was touted as being the person who's going to fill that seat, which was originally Sir Jeff's, a lot of people commented on that. It wouldn't bother me too much, you know. I think it's a weakness that that's the case, but I
Mm.
honestly wouldn't worry about it too much. I would worry more about, as I say, there was a certain degree of, well, it wasn't grudge, but it was slow. You know, we'll work with you. We're not going to allow history to be rewritten. We'll work with you, but there was terrible things you did, and here's an example of it. That kind of thing's a bad start, really. Um,
Yeah,
but you know, let's hope that it works. But I'll tell you the truth, Pat. I really don't think it's going to work. I know that's awful, but
yeah,
starting off, but there's so many things working again. That kind of initial um, sort of slowness to embrace the outstretched hand or to take the outstretched hand fully. I thought that was
yeah,
lacking. The second thing is is this divergence thing is going to be big. That is to say, will the north of Ireland keep itself in line, aligned with the EU, or will they be struggling all the time, the DUP, a battle a day, to see rules passed by GB that will bring them further out of, away from the single market rules? Because if that happens, the opportunity is going to go. I mean, if you were an investor and you said, oh, geez, this is a great place, European single market and access to the UK. I'll go for that. And then
Yeah.
you suddenly began to discover, oh, geez, they've diverged there. They've changed that. The Northern Ireland seems to go all the time with Britain, and that takes them further away from the EU. You'd really pause and wonder, is this a good idea to invest in somewhere where things seem to be changing and the rules are being changed when the opportunity arises?
Jude, you know the thing about, I think the that whole original idea, was a bit of a fudge. That Northern Ireland could go both ways. It could go into EU and all the rest
Yeah.
of it. And I think they should have really have taken it. Dude, there apparently this thing about the Stormont break, apparently that can be challenged within something like a month. And that's the whole thing about divergence from EU rules. But here's the thing, Jude. Uh, if along the way now, people, as you say, want to invest, Northern Ireland looks like a great place now if their corporation tax comes down to 12.5%.
Yeah.
Like the South has benefited unbelievably from foreign direct investment. But it almost, the unions seem to want to snub their noses or cut off their noses want to be more British. It doesn't matter about the economics or the opportunities or the investment that could come their way, as long as we can stay more like Britain. And by the way, Britain's economy is basically flatlining. And I think it was David McWilliams saying it's only the beginning of Brexit. Wait for another 5 years and see where Britain is. And if I remember correctly, Jude, was it last week or the week before? Somebody did an interview with about 10 people in Britain about Brexit, and not one of them said it's benefited them economically. So why does Northern Ireland want to stick with a Brexit that's failing rather than an EU that's growing?
Well, let me be the devil's advocate. I think the reason they want to do that is to assert their Britishness. Whereas if they submit to as they say, the EU rules and become a EU colony, that would be bad news for their traditional stance as British people. And in a way, I've always said this, in a way they're right, when they're being pulled away from it. But if you sign the deal, if you've signed the deal, you're supposed to keep it. And when you start it, you're supposed to give it the best push you possibly can. I didn't detect that. And I mean, I haven't even mentioned Jim Alister yet.
Yeah. But no, you just revert to the on Saturday. I thought it was remarkably low key, the whole thing. There was no rah-rah skirts and balloons. There was no celebrations. There was no real That's the other thing, Jude, by the way. When you said you haven't mentioned Jim Alister yet, I hadn't mentioned Jimmy Bryson. Remember, I saw on social media on Friday calls for people to come out and protest, to block the roads and do this and all the rest of it. Now, I was thinking, I didn't detect that in any shape or form on any of the stuff, but that's what was on social media on Friday. And on Saturday, there was no sign of any sort of protest or anything else. Now, remember one of the claims made when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, that Trumble's big problem was he didn't go out and sell it. He basically he went for the negative. We didn't give away this, we didn't give away that. Rather than going, we got this, we got that. He didn't do the positive. He did the negative.
Yeah.
Donaldson, in fairness to him, from the last, remember when he appeared at the podium at 5-1 or whatever it was, he started selling it right away as his deal. In fact, Jeffrey has developed an edge of steel that I didn't notice before. That he's really gone for Jim Alister and people like and Jimmy Bryson, basically saying, look, the ones our framework come in, I fought against it. This is what I got. What did you get?
Yes, that's true. That's true. He definitely did, and he spoke with more passion than I've ever seen him do before. But I'm not sure that he was speaking with passion about the opportunities very much that this gave. What he was speaking about was the way that they had destroyed essentially the Irish sea border between the north and GB. So he wasn't pointing. I don't think he was that positive.
I think that was that's where the attacks on his flank were coming from, and I presume that's the one what he might have needed to address most. What was it, Jude, that he said? You sort of go in for poetry. You sort of and rule and prose.
Aye.
Well, I'd say Jeffrey had to sort of address that. That's where all his trouble was coming from. So that's maybe when he gets into government, he could be far more pragmatic.
Well, yeah, Jeffrey gave a hint in one of his talks about the need for unionism to be an attractive sort of political creed. His job was to really shore up unionism and show its attractions and so on. He said that, and I think he's bang on, because that's the one thing that will save unionism, if they can persuade nationalists or other people to join and believe in unionism. But, he didn't spend much time talking about it, maybe because, as you say, he was afraid of his own internal dissent, and, of course, Jim Allister as well. But he really should. He really should stick up the flag and say, listen, I know unionism is doomed. If we don't shake our leg and start getting people to see the advantages, and there are advantages to being in the UK. In addition, one last point to this. Unionism has one great advantage. They're in the UK. The union with Britain exists. And it's harder usually to change from something the way it is than to remain with things the way they are. Most people resist change. They don't like change. They're scared of change. So it should be an easier sell for him. And yet, he doesn't seem to be making much of an effort. Is that too? Am I being too hard on him, Pat?
No, I think that unionism, the one has got to change. The reality is the demographics are running against them, the politics are running against them, history is running against them, and it's and they're the one that I seem to have the problem. They're trying to say. When I watch Jim Allister and people like that, I'm going, Jim, someone you still think you're back in somewhere in 1940s Northern Ireland. It's not real. The days of being to sort of suggest that the Queen sort of would be able to walk around Hillsborough. Well, she's dead, so that's a bit of difficult. But that whole thing about the royal family and so on, and it's as British as Finchley. No, it's not. Last Saturday proved that there is now a nationalist as the First Minister. Symbolism does matter because things have changed. And the days of one community sort of being able to tell the other that you have no rights. Jude, let's talk about Jim Allister and people like that for a long time. The nationalist community, there was no such thing as an Irish dimension, even though this place is called Ireland, and and the people who live there, the native people, are Irish. There was no Irish Language Act. There was no acknowledgement of people being Irish. There was what we call them, 50 years of Stormont rule, one party. There was a paramilitary or a quasi-paramilitary group called the B Specials who were brought out at night to sort of intimidate their Catholic neighbours. There was all sorts of wee murders and so on. There was discrimination, bigotry, and all the rest of it. And that all has been swept under the carpet as if, the IRA and the violence came out of nowhere. And as you said earlier on about the thing about Emma Little Pengelly and so on, you were right in a way. Then Michelle O'Neill could have stayed all that when she sat up on Saturday. She didn't. She reached out.
She chose not to, yeah.
So I am sort of saying, look, maybe some people should really seriously start addressing Jim Allister and say, Jim, if you want to go down this road, we all can.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that Jim's only the only representative of his party in the Assembly says something. That even within unionism, there's not too many that are following his lead. But let's leave that's the past, the recent past, and the past back 50, 100 years ago. Let's look at the future, Pat. Let's put your cards on the table. You put on your thinking hat, your prediction hat, and tell us, do you think this Assembly is going to be a success? When people look back in 10, 20 years' time and say, see, when they got together, Michelle O'Neill and Emma Little Pengelly, that was the beginning of something really worthwhile. Do you think they'll say that?
No, I don't think so, Jude. But here's the thing. It's a negative rather than a positive. I think if it goes down again, it'll never come back up.
No, it won't. And I agree.
I think both. I think both the loyalists and the DUP and the unionist community know that, as does the nationalists. So, Jude, for both of them, then the stakes get very high, particularly for unionism, because if there's direct rule, no matter what Britain says or Jeffrey Donaldson or anybody else says, there's going to be an enhanced role for Dublin. That's an absolute given. It's not even up for discussion. There is no way they can revert to the 1970s megaphone diplomacy. There'll be, particularly if Sinn Féin are in control, and North and South, the biggest party. And the days of London sort of, saying we'll do this and we'll do that. Well, for start, it would lead to absolute mayhem on the streets.
I noticed that Rishi Sunak and Leo Varadkar are going to be north today. And you were
Yeah.
suggesting to me earlier, before we started this, that was a sign of the closeness with which the South was working with the North. Well, yes, it is. But actually, since the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was signed by Gareth Fitzgerald, the South has made its presence clearly felt, and the British have accepted that. Sometimes they're just standing there as a sort of a photo opportunity, but very often they're more involved than that. And certainly with Sinn Féin in the South doing as well as they are, and Sinn Féin obviously being the ruling party or the top party in the North, it seems to me the South's involvement will just simply become greater as time goes by. The trouble is, you see, that's going to, the more that happens, the more unhappy so many unions are going to be. Do you think would it be worthwhile for us to do what we say that unionists should be doing but aren't? Unionists should be reaching out, should be trying to extend their attraction. Should maybe republicanism or nationalism, should they not be sitting down and stressing how good a deal a United Ireland would be, or the involvement, as you say, of the South, even in the northern state?
Dude, we've been doing this now for 4 or 5 years. And I think the one thing we regularly say, and I have heard you say it a million times now, I think I've said it as well, that if we're going forward, we need a plan.
Yeah.
We should have a strategy, sort of saying, as you say, that we should be reaching out to unionists and saying, look, this is what's on offer. This is what's, here's the roadmap. Okay, we can diverge from it here and there, but look, here's the plan, and so on. And this could include what we can talk about health, about education, about politics, about whatever. So, Jude, but you're right. We haven't really sort of done that, and we do need to reach out if we're serious about creating the conditions for a border pool in the United Ireland, and we should learn from the unionists how not to run a society, and we should learn from the Brits how not to run a border pool like Brexit, or a pool like Brexit. So you're dead right. We should learn, and there are things. Dude, we should definitely have some sort of thing. Why a United Ireland is a good idea.
Yeah, it seems to me the South is now having any number of citizens' assemblies for different things, the woman's place in the home and all that stuff from the Constitution. Why is Sinn Féin not? Maybe they're waiting till this election's over. They're scared they'll frighten the horses. But somebody, Ireland's Future Group or whatever, somebody should say, listen, let's get a planning group together here. Let's get a citizens' assembly ideally, but if not that, something else that will take and turn the major features that people would be concerned about in the United Ireland, and let's lay out some facts and figures. Now, I know your mate and you were involved in the book that does that, but you've got to do it now in the light of events, inside the last year.
That was myself and Paul Gosling was the main.
Paul Gosling, that's right, yeah.
Paul Gosling, Colin McKenna, and myself were involved in, and we did. But the whole idea was to put it on a ground floor, and other people had to. We're not politicians, and we're not civil servants, and we're not. The whole idea was, look, let's put it out there. And which, by the way, Paul did a lot of work. Paul's a former financial journalist, and he's an English guy, and he didn't have any. Not sort of, don't mean this wrong, but he doesn't have skin in the game the same way as people here. It was done in sort of an intellectual way, in a sense that here's what's available and all the rest of it. And I would claim that it's a very good starting point, and so on. But no one's taken on. In fact, Michael Martin, Jude, I keep saying this, he seems to want to keep running away from any suggestion of a future border pool or United Ireland. It's all the time about unionism. Yeah, and I accept that they have their rights and so on. But there's another community who now just happen to be the larger one, who have also got rights, and you can't keep denying. To give one people the rights, you can't deny the other people their rights.
Well, I was telling you at the weekend I was in Dublin, and my brother-in-law was there, and he was busy reading the Sunday Independent, and I was saying, I'm not all that keen on that particular newspaper, and he said, "Why not?"
Yeah,
I said, "Well, it seems to me they tend to have a lot of anti-Sinn Féin articles," and they said, "Oh, I don't know." And then we looked at the paper. Jesus, there was at least two really, attack dog articles about Sinn Féin and how they were bad and how they were tied to the
uh,
past and God knows what,
yeah,
really just laying into them, this sort of thing.
yeah,
I think it's time really that Sinn Féin or, people who believe in the United Ireland or republicanism should be heading back at that kind of thing and just showing these people how silly they are.
yeah,
Or maybe again, I'm saying that, and at the same time, I'm just thinking probably Sinn Féin is playing it low at the moment, or keeping it fairly low key. They're for United Ireland, but they're not going to frighten the horses because otherwise
yeah.
it could be that they would lose these people who are going to vote for them for reasons other than United Ireland. You think is that right?
I remember there was a guy who used to attack Sinn Féin regularly, and I said to Martin McGuinness one day, and he said, Pat, the minute I attack him, he says, I'm giving him credibility. He says, the worst thing in this world is to be ignored. And so he says, I ignore him.
Aye, that's
And there was an element of truth there.
aye, aye. Good point. Good
Yeah,
point. All right.
yeah.
It's
But
hard
you
to
look
resist
at it like
though.
this. Go ahead. No, but since
No,
since 2016, what Britain has had five prime ministers. They have had about seven chancellors. They've had any number of ministers. Their policy making credibility has gone down as Swanee. City of London is losing whatever, whatever. And you're saying to yourself, if you were a unionist, you said, "No, what are we going here? What's the big attraction? The health service, the health service in the north is now the worst in Britain." David McWilliams was on. I read someone about a couple, but it must have been about a week ago. He says he travelled from Dublin, going to Donegal, and he says he noticed the roads in the south are far, far superior to the ones in the north. He says the hospitals. He says he has relatives who work in the NHS in the north, and he says they have never seen it so bad. There isn't even money to repair some stuff in hospitals, like infrastructure. Jude, what's the big attraction of being, is it all to do with identity?
oh, I think that's what it is. I really do think that's what it is. The sash my father wore, that's essentially saying, am I going to turn my back on my ancestors, my father, the
Yeah,
sash, all those things? And again, in a way, that's kind of understandable, to a certain degree, because if that's the
I
tradition you're brought
understand
up
that.
in,
Yeah,
and that's what you're
yeah.
taught to defend, and, that it's a very strong part of your identity. But I thought fair play to Michelle O'Neill yesterday or Saturday. She said, your Britishness, your culture, we respect that. And we will, leave room for that, even within the northern state. I thought that was very good. That was a very important point to make. And
Yeah.
as Alex Kane says, most people will vote for a United Ireland or against it, depending on their emotions, not on their
Yeah.
intellect, but through their emotions. So maybe we've got
Yeah.
to try to take that into account when we try to persuade unionists of the
Uh,
possible advantages, or at least what they'd be faced with if they were
so,
voting.
so really, what you're saying is what we've been talking about this for this last 20 minutes or so, about investment, about opportunities, about economic
Yeah.
values. It's a waste of time because when it comes to putting our wee tick on the box, it'll be all to do with emotion.
I will, but you see, I got emotion rotates around the idea of Britishness. And I noticed
Yeah.
that Michelle O'Neill was saying, we'll respect your Britishness. And it is possible. I remember talking to a guy from Foreign Affairs, a friend of Jim Sharkey's actually. And he was saying, yeah, of course we can. I says, what do you mean they still be British in a United Ireland? And he said, well, all the things that they, makes up their Britishness, their titles from the Queen or the King in this case, Sir, whatever, or there's OBE or the celebration of the 12th. Yes, he says, certainly we'll make provision for that. Knock yourselves out, he said. And, you can't do fairer than that. You allow for
Yeah.
democracy, and yet you respect everybody, especially however irrational the things they hold dear may seem to you. You have to accept that there's something important for them. And I'm
Yeah,
sure there's
Jude,
things that,
you just triggered some of the on. I came across it on Saturday. Sir Basil Brooke, KB or whatever it was,
yeah,
so on. He has famous quote: "The Catholics, I wouldn't have one about the place. Anyone who any unionist who employs a Catholic should, they are basically traitors, and I would urge you to employ good Catholic or good unionist boys and girls." That was in the 1930s.
yeah,
You know, no, no, this, and by the way, that was an educated sort of member of the upper classes, Sir
yeah.
Basil Brooke. He was baronet something or other.
Aye.
That's what the nationalists had to live with. So, I'm sort of sitting here, and I'm listening to all this thing that you're chatting about, and we're chatting about the loyalist sense of identity.
Yeah.
Where is the sort of parity of esteem for the national sense of identity that's been denied for so long?
Pat, I know the point you're making, but I think we just have to accept that we can't change. Well, we may be able to change it, but I think the only way that you can sort of counter it is not by trying to push hard your own version of things, but simply to lay stuff out objectively. That's why I think it's very
Yeah,
important to build on the thing that book that Paul Gosling produced, or that you were involved with
yeah,
too. I think it's important to build on that and start putting out some figures so these people can have this as a counterbalance to their instinctive desire to stay where they are. And I'm sure there's some
yeah.
Catholics and so-called nationalists who would be similarly needful of some reassurance in the event of a united Ireland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the whole thing. It's right. We're now probably at a major point, Jude. What happens in the next 5, 10 years is going to be sort of what would you say, D-Day,
Mm.
because I think last Saturday was symbolic, Jude, in a
Mm.
big way.
Oh yeah,
It was a changing after 103 years of our
yeah,
history.
yeah,
And I think, as you said at the start, Michelle O'Neill, she looked the part, she acted the part. There was a generosity there. There
mm.
was a message going out, not just to the north, but all of the island about what Sinn Féin's role is going to be in the future, and so on, and so on. So I take it, Jude, we're sitting on a way with watching history being made, and we're trying to sort of pick up the entrails and figure out where it's all going, and it's going to be very interesting in the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. I think, and we'll leave this topic now. I think that, yes, it's very important for Michelle O'Neill to say the things she said and for that to be followed up by actions where you do have respect for people who've got from a different tradition, who believe
Yeah,
they are part of Britain and so on. But I also think it's quite important that you're firm in your own beliefs and clear in your own
yeah,
beliefs and give reasons why you have these beliefs.
yeah.
It'd be dangerous to roll over and say, well, oh yeah, we don't want to upset you now. I don't think anybody really respects that kind of thing. I think very often that accommodation is
That
seen
was
as
unbelievable.
weakness.
Yeah, Jeffrey Donaldson has spent the last 2 years expounding about how British Northern Ireland is and
Mm.
how important British is and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
And this morning, here he was back in the same hobby horse. This is divisive comment because Michelle O'Neill said she wanted a border poll. It's going, God merciful Jesus, wait a minute, what another God. So, a nationalist is not even allowed to suggest that that the Irish unification can't be discussed. Jude, let's get this clear: the native people of this island are the nationalist people. Guys like you can go back generations and generations. Your people can go back. Surely it's the most minor thing that the Collinses and the McGarts and anybody else who have lived in this island for generations. I presume my people might have come in with the Norsemen or something, that to want to live in unity with your other citizens in this island. That is not, I am not threatening anybody. I am not being aggressive. But the right to live in Irish unity surely should be a basic common sense, non-threat to anybody.
Couldn't agree more. But at the moment, it's being seen as a threat. So I think we've got to sort of, on the one hand, show that we respect people who have different views, and on the other hand, be clear and firm on the things that we believe in and that we're striving for, the kind of Ireland that you're going to produce. I think that, because again and again, you hear people say, "Oh, join on to the Republic." No way, no way. I don't want to join on to the Republic. I want a new Ireland. That is a totally different. It will be a different place, and that's why you're getting a kickback from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It will be, because you'll have a totally new component. For a start, you'll have roughly 1 million unionists, who could very well form alliances or form their own party. Anyway, okay, enough of that already, Pat. We're down to, God almighty, 2 minutes. And you noted something from the New York Times about
Jude, I
officials.
thought it was really significant. 800 senior, I think mainly senior civil servants in the US, UK, and Europe have signed a letter criticizing their governments about the policy in Gaza. They're saying that they're basically they feel that they could be actually involved, implicit in war crimes, and also they're having a serious go about the inhumanity of it all. Jude, I was delighted to see it, because they're basically now, the civil servants are saying, "Wait a minute, this is not good enough." But Jude, know the other thing about it, I really feel, if now they respond to it, they have allowed the Israelis to do all they want. It doesn't really matter at this stage. They have destroyed Gaza. They have murdered somewhere in the region of 30,000 people. 60 or 70,000 kids people are injured, a lot of them women and children. So the damage is done. The irreparable damage is done. And the Israelis, they'll launch a massive propaganda campaign when it's all over, to say it was all justified. And the West will buy it. The governments will buy it again. So I think it's disgraceful.
Oh, it's very sad. We're practically finished now, but I remember last week, Pat, was it last week, that you pointed out that Question Time, sort of flagship political discussion program on BBC, that they hadn't mentioned Gaza. Well, they mentioned it, as you know, I'm sure, last week.
No, I didn't see it last Thursday night.
Oh, they mentioned it last week. Boy, oh boy. It was took place in Glasgow, and the audience had no mixed feelings about this. There was one Conservative guy on, and he looked pathetic. There was also a Scottish Labour man on, and he was nearly as pathetic, because he was, quoting Keir Starmer. But there is a strong body of people in Britain, I would say in the States as well, and certainly in Ireland, that are absolutely opposed. I'll tell you my little spear in the river. I was coming back from Dublin. I wanted a soft drink, and I went in, and for the first time, maybe ever, I bought 7-Up instead of about 1,000 cans of Coke were there. Don't drink Coca-Cola. That's my advice, because they are not just support, but supplying Israel, right?
Right.
So don't let me catch you, Pat. I don't want to see you with either an AK-47 or a can of Coke in your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, Pat. Thanks very much.
Bye, Jen. See you later.